I want to talk to you today about the cycle that we all often go through. And it's this cycle: restoration, service. Restoration, service. Restoration, service. Have you ever noticed that a lot of times what our life is about is that we go somewhere to get restored, so we become well, and then off we go for service, and then we do some service, and then all of a sudden we get a little tainted or tired or worn, and then we have to get restored again, and then we're back out for service, and then we go back to get restored, and it's a cycle, just back and forth. And that's the way life is. And that's the way it is for us, and that's the way it is for my suitcase. Because what happens is it gets restored, and then it's used, it gets broken, it gets restored, and then it's used. Okay, I have a brother-in-law, his name is Galen, and he's a person who restores old cars. Some of these old treasures. And one of the ones he restored several years ago was a 1957 Chevy Bel Air. Okay, and I'll tell you what, it was really a hot-looking car, because we went out to visit him, and it was in October, and so he had it in his special place, which was this garage that you could eat off the floors, if you know what I mean. I never saw anything so shiny, and it was sitting there. The hubcaps were immaculate. I mean, every piece of it was just brilliantly done. He even opened up the hood and showed me the engine. I never saw an engine look like that in my life. It was so silverly beautiful. It glistened. And I said to him, I said, so it's all restored, it's all done? He said, yes. And I said, well, when are you going to run it? And he says, this is October. He says, not until the spring. Not until the spring, I'm not going to take it out in this kind of weather at all or even risk it. So it was already restored now for about 6 months by the time we got there. And then it was October, and he was going to wait till spring. And so the big day came in May for him to take it out and use it. And he went in to start it, and it wouldn't start. Couldn't get it to start. What he found out was, being inactive for all that time, it developed a dry rot in one of the cables. Okay, and so I guess what that sort of says is that once you're repaired, you better get into service, because if you don't, some of your belts will dry rot. And so think about it. Some of you were around and knew about the Gemini and the Apollo missions that we had in our country. Remember those? And so it was the first time that humans were in space or in that weightlessness place. And so what was really noticeable was whenever they came back after a week of being in space, that whenever they got onto the Earth, it was very difficult for them to walk, because what had happened in that weightlessness was that their muscles atrophied, you see? And so it's only with use does a restored body work, and sometimes that restoration can be real dramatic, very incredibly dramatic, like a rehab kind of experience. But then it can be much more short. It can be those little momentary tune-ups. Like, for example, we all have cell phones, right? And so isn't it true that in order to operate a cell phone today, what we have to do is every night we have to charge it for about a whole 24 hours or so. Then we use it. That's a tune-up. And then sometimes your battery will go and you have to actually buy a new one, right? That's called rehab. Okay, but the key here is that we all need rehab, we all need renewed, we all need restoration, and it's not okay to stay restored, because the next step is to serve. And then that brings us to today's gospel. So, whenever you think about today's gospel, so it's a story about a very private moment for Jesus. And so, if you notice what happens here in that gospel, we're in St. Mark this year, and so we're only in chapter 1, and so much has happened in chapter 1 already. Now, chapter 1, here's what all has happened. Listen to this. There's no birth story in Mark at all. You start with Jesus as an adult, because it's all around action. So here's what happens so far in chapter 1. Jesus gets baptized, then he goes out into the desert to confront the devil, and he wins, and the angels come and minister to him. Then he comes back, and he gathers around all his apostles, and they immediately leave their nets. And then they do what we read about last week, Jesus goes into the temple, into the synagogue, and he's preaching there. He's an itinerant preacher, so he must have developed that kind of presence already. And there's a man with an evil spirit, and so he publicly dispels the evil spirit. And then today's gospel, they leave the church, the synagogue, and they just go a few houses down, and that happens to be Simon's house. And even today, if you visit that location in Capernaum, you'll see that the house where Simon's mother-in-law was is just a couple houses down from this synagogue. And so Jesus goes in there in a very private moment. He touches her, raises her up, and she immediately is healed, restored, and she goes into service. Now, a couple other things happen there too is it's the Sabbath, so you see Jesus is performing a miracle on the Sabbath, not good to be a Jew and do that. And then the other thing that Jesus crosses, another boundary, is he risks ritual impurity. He touches the sick person. Now, a fever isn't just a fever like we know it back then. A fever in Jesus' day could well be death. So it's really a big deal what he does. And then some of the people hear about this in the neighborhood, and they're good Jews, and they don't come immediately. They wait until the Sabbath is over, the sunset, then they come, and the gospel says everyone's at that door to be healed. They're all there. And Jesus apparently heals them, and then he gets tired and goes out to the wilderness, and then everyone's hunting him down. All in a day's work. I mean, that's an awful lot that happens, right? Whenever you think about that. So Mark's gospel is fast and it's immediate. Now, examine that miracle that occurred there, that very private miracle. So you have Simon's mother-in-law who is sick with fever, about to die. Jesus has caring compassion on her because he stops in to see her. And so he goes over, puts his hand out to her, touches her, and she is raised up and she is healed, restored, like my suitcase gets restored. And then her immediate reaction after that is to serve and wait on them. Interesting. So, when you're restored, then you serve. Now, this is a gospel passage that a lot of people have eisegeted. Let me just get a little Bible study-ish on you. So, there's two ways you can look at the scripture. You can eisegete it or you can exegete it. Here's the difference. When you eisegete it is, you have an idea that you want proven. So, like for example, in some people's case with this passage, women have been subservient, okay, and I want to prove that this is not right. So what people then do with that idea is they go to a scripture and they find the proof of it. See, here's what happens. The only woman in the place, so she gets healed, and what does she do? Immediately waits on the men. That's eisegeting. Now, here's what exegeting is. Exegeting is to let scripture be scripture and then let it reflect on your experience. So you don't go in with any kind of interpretation. So the people who eisegete this particular scripture passage might be in danger because they're not looking at it in the right frame of mind. See, because here's what we need to know about this passage, which is very relevant to us today, is that word, whenever Peter's mother-in-law gets up and starts to provide for them, that's a word that is used several verses ahead of this, where Jesus is in the desert and he wins the battle against Satan, and then he's all alone, just so tired, and the angels come, and that same verb is used, provide for him. Now, what that means is not like serve, like in a kind of like subservient way. It means to diaconate. It means to disciple Jesus. See, in other words, what that passage actually means is those women are ordained right then and there. You see? It's a whole different kind of passage. And see, and then the point that I think we want to look at today is this. Whenever you get restored, you don't stay in restoration mode. You immediately move out to service mode. And whatever that ministry is that you're called to. You see? Now, people come to church, I think. We're a church, and we go go through these different phases. Some of you are here today to be restored, okay? So you've been suffering. So different things have been taken from you, and you're in restoration mode. Others of you are in service mode. So you're kind of fixed for the moment, all right? And it's now time for you to get empowered and keep going on, you see? So it's good for you from time to time to think on what mode you're in, all right? Now, both modes are fine. That's why you come to church. Now, here's the problem, though. If you can't stay in a mode when you're done with it. You see, whenever you are restored, you can't keep staying in restored mode. In other words, you see, your belt will dry rot. You see, you got to go out and do. You see, and that's what has to happen. Like, you know that we raised a niece, for almost 2 decades. And so she came to us very needy, okay, in restore mode. So with us, she went back to school, she kind of got her act together a little bit more, she became a flight attendant, then she became a nurse, and all this other kind of stuff. And so she was getting restored, all along. And then, here's what I noticed, was she went through 3 relationships. Oh, is that fun for us to watch? 3 relationships. And then what I noticed was, after now getting near 20 years, okay, that she was no longer in a relationship, but she was spending most of her time with us on a Saturday. So she'd be out eating with us, going to movies with us, and it dawned on me, Bridget, my dear, you gotta move. You're done. You're fixed. It's time for you to move. And so I remember having that conversation with her, honey, you spend too much time with your uncles. You got to go out and make a life, and was that ever wobbly, and was that ever hard to do? Kind of like whenever, a bird, realizes that the little birdlings are now ready to leave the nest, and, a bird actually, can you imagine being a little bird, and all this time your mother bird has come and fed you these worms, and you didn't have to do anything except just open your mouth, and then all of a sudden you see your mother bird coming to you, and now she's forcing you out of the nest. You say, what's happened to mother? She's forcing me out of the net, I'm going to fall, and that sometimes has to happen. So that's the problem. Don't stay over-restored. Get moving into your service. So what that might mean is something like this, that, okay, you're kind of like together, and you can cook, and you have enough money to buy some food. Well, it's time to maybe make a meal for Mary Makers. You see? But the only thing that might be holding you back is, maybe you don't like what I cook. See, it's time to move. It's time to do. Or, you might already be trained in things like, you know your religion, you know what it means to be an Episcopalian, you know who God is for you. You've been around the block enough. You've been to enough church. And you actually could teach Sunday school. You actually could. You can actually fill in for that, and you're holding back. Now, I'm not saying you don't have to rush and do that, but you see the point I want to make is don't stay in restore mode whenever you're being called to do something, you see? And so that's what we have to watch for. Now, on the other side, some of us sometimes are in serve mode too long, and you can't be in serve mode too long. Sylvia today gave me permission to kind of share a little bit about this. Sylvia was one of our parishioners who does. I mean, and then she had a car accident because she had an event that occurred, and she blacked out for a moment. And now she's in repair mode, and it's tough. It's tough to be in repair mode whenever you're used to being in serve mode, all the time. But you got to do that. You got to let yourself be repaired. I had an aunt who was into that. She was 82 years old, and she left her place in Philadelphia. She went down to about 400 miles away to pick up her brother, just to take him to his chemotherapy treatments. And people said to her, Margaret, what are you doing that for? You're traveling 400 miles just to do that. And her word was, she said, I'd rather be in a position where I can do this for him rather than to have someone do it for me. It's much more comfortable to be in that place, but the problem with Aunt Margaret was she then did need to be repaired, and she missed it by 7 months. and she kept forcing herself. So you see, it's perfectly okay to be in either of those two modes, but don't overstay them. Learn to go where you need to go. So there's some studies out in terms of Americans, and most of us prefer to be in serve mode, not in repair mode. You see, most of us would rather be the Jesus in this story, not the mother-in-law. You see, most of us like to be able to be the actor, not the acted upon. And it's understandable why that is, because whenever you need repaired, that means you've experienced a loss. And whenever you experience a loss, and it can come from different ways. It can come from outside of yourself, like a friend let you down. You have a child who has an addiction problem and they robbed you. So lots of things like that can create loss in you. Or the loss can come from yourself. You missed an opportunity. You had an opportunity to go to school, but you didn't take it, and now you regret it. Or, it can come from you in terms of hanging around with the wrong bunch for a period of time, and this happened to you. So the loss can come from that. And then the loss can come from just life. You get a sickness that you didn't count on, that you didn't expect. See, the thing is, we will get into the places where we need repaired, and they're generally based upon a loss. Now, here's what you and I often do, and here's where we go wrong. We start to have regrets. See, we start to allow ourselves to say, why did I let that happen? I shouldn't have done this. This is my last chance. Nothing good will ever come to me again. And the more you do that, the less God is able to act. See, it's not about trying to get God more active. God is more active. We limit God for us in the way that we self-negate. That's what we need to let go of in order for God to restore us. See, we have a God of restoration. God is eager to help us. See, that's what we see in Isaiah. See, have you not seen, have you not heard? Do you remember the first things? These people were in exile, and they were feeling like nothing good is going to be happening for us anymore. But the prophet is telling, have you not seen, have you not heard? God has been there for you. Do you know that God is still for you, and God will be for you? You just got to wait for him. Just wait for him. He never will let you down. See, that's what we affirm. I know God, it's not happening to me today, and there's a part of me that wants to kind of like give up, but I know you're faithful. I know you'll do it for me. This is what it always says. See, and look what Jesus does today. I mean, he leaves the synagogue, and immediately he would never, ever turn away from someone that needed him. See, God is eager to restore you. So, in the scripture too, if you go into it, there's some interesting Old Testament rules. If someone steals your oxen, here's what God says. You need to be paid back with 5 oxen. So not only is God going to restore you to what it was, God's going to even give you more. There's a thing there, someone steals your sheep, they got to give you 4 of them. In another place, 5 of them. See, Isaiah says, God will pay you double for what you've lost. See, God is not only the God of restoration, but he won't restore you to the original like my brother-in-law Galen did to his 57 Chevy Bel Air. He brought it back to its original shape. God will even give you more than what you want. But we have to believe. We have to take that risk. We have to let God restore us. One last thing. Whenever I left the Capuchin order, okay, I was like 35 years old, something like that. And I belonged to a religious order that I took 3 vows. One was chastity, poverty, and obedience. Now, the poverty one was interesting because I own nothing. All right, so all of a sudden I get on the scene and am entering into a public life and have no record of employment, except for 2 years in college. I painted hospital beds to pay my way through college. So I think I had made $1,780. That's all I had. Then there was this big gap of no employment, no employment, no employment, no employment. So every time I went to apply for credit, I would be turned down all the time, because they would say, well, did you come from a wealthy family? I said, no. So then you're in prison, right? And I kind of like said, yeah, in a way. but that's what see. So just imagine, just rekindling. And whenever I left, I had 800 bucks. That's all I had. And so it was really tough to build up that credit thing. And so I did. In 5 years, I was able to get credit. But then, right after I got credit, I got this bill for $3,048.30. Now I had it, and I was kind of chipping away at it, but I couldn't really make the payment. And I had no one to call upon. And I was now going to be reported to the credit bureaus and all that kind of stuff. And it was going to be just totally blown. And so I got to that point of, I need you. What's going to happen? I tried to work more, all this other kind of stuff. Here's what happened. Maybe about 3 or 4 weeks into this, my ex-sister-in-law calls and said, Regis, we've been out in eastern Pennsylvania around Allentown, Bethlehem, and we were looking at some newspapers there, and there was this one newspaper that had missing money. Do you know what I'm talking about? They'll publish it. And your name was in there. I said, what? He says, your name's in there. I said, well, I know no one in Allentown or Bethlehem. What is this all about? And she said, well, I'll send you the paper. So a couple days later it came in, and I saw it, and it said where to call. And so I did. And guess what? There was a great uncle who knew of me that I went into the seminary, and he left a dividend. And that's what I had. And guess how much it was? $6,096.31. Now, if you do the math, that's double what I owed, plus a penny. See, how are you going to choose to understand that? Coincidence? Perhaps. See, what I choose to understand that as is, that's the God of restoration. That's Isaiah, double for what you lost. That's faith. Do I have proof? But I have faith. And that's why I share that with you today. That's the kind of God we serve.